Welcome to Business 210, Principles of Management with Professor Joe Lane here on a very snowy day here in the Twin Cities. Okay, it's not snowy. It's August. But if you didn't catch that, you weren't paying attention. So I was just checking to make sure that you were paying attention to what I was saying. No snow, August, hot day. All right. Chapter 8 has to do with organizational culture and structure. Chapter 8 is kind of like Chapter 2. Now that's that chapter on the science, the body of knowledge. You can get incredibly deep. But fortunately for you and for me, I don't think we need to do that. I think we need to get the basic ideas behind Chapter 8. This is an organizational, an organizational chart. This would be the CEO. This might be senior vice presidents. You know how an organizational chart works. Okay. I'm just going to take this organizational chart and I'm going to cut it in half. And over here, I'm going to put culture. And over here, I'm going to put structure. My red is pretty weak, but hopefully you can kind of see that. What Chapter 8 is talking about is that every organization has a structure. It's structured some kind of way. And every organization has a culture. Different companies are structured differently. Different companies have different cultures. So let's talk a little bit about organizational structure and organizational culture. All right. Now, organizational culture is one of those. Culture is kind of hard to describe. The culture of an organization. Certain organizations just seem to be certain ways. If I ask you, what's the culture of GameStop? GameStop. You say, one thing you probably say is, I bet Joe Lane didn't go in there very much, and you're probably right. Okay. What's the culture of Chick-fil-A? Does it have a faith type culture? They're not opening on Sunday, that sort of thing. It has a particular culture. Can the culture of an organization change? Yes, but not quickly. You can change the structure pretty fast, but culture is more difficult. Now let's look at the definition. Organizational culture. As a matter of fact, hang on. I want to use the whole definition, and I'm going to use it out of the book here. I put my book in a folder. So let me see if I can find organizational culture. I'm going to do the whole definition with you. The shared assumptions that affect how work gets done. Organizational culture is defined as the shared, taken for granted, implicit assumptions that a group holds and determines how it perceives, thinks about, and reacts to its various environments. Wow, let's try that again. Is defined as the set of shared, taken for granted, implicit assumptions. So these are things that are shared by all members of the organization. They're taken for granted that this is the way it is, that a group holds, and that determines how it perceives, thinks about, and reacts to its various environments. These particular assumptions that this company shares and takes for granted determines how it perceives, thinks about, and reacts to its various environments. So a company's culture is pretty important. And we talked about, do different companies have different cultures? Let's think about something else that we're kind of familiar with. Delta Community College. What's the culture of Delta Community College? Is its culture different maybe than Louisiana Tech? Maybe different than LSU? A community college, the idea behind a community college, it's a college for the community. More interaction between professors and students. The average age may be older than in some universities. It's intended to be more of a family culture. You take a university like ULM or Tech, universities, more research involved, more emphasis on, you're talking about task-oriented or people-oriented, probably a little more task-oriented, academic-oriented. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying one's good and one's bad. I'm just saying that the culture at Tech is going to be different than the culture at Delta. We'll have students that will come through here, graduate, and they'll go to a four-year university, and I'll come back and they'll say, boy, it sure is different there. It doesn't mean it's worse, it's just the culture is different. Okay. So a lot of times, let's take CenturyLink. The person who founded CenturyLink, a very strong faith person, a very family-oriented person, kind of sounds like Duck Dynasty, Duck Commander, those folks when you think about them, you think, oh, it's a bunch of crazy guys, but at the same time, they're very, very faith-oriented. They have that type of a culture. Some companies have, some technology companies, their culture is kind of free-spirited type culture. IBM, some companies like that are pretty straight-laced type companies. And again, I'm not saying it's wrong, but a company has a particular culture about itself, and it's hard to change that culture. The shared assumptions that affects how work gets done. That's a company's culture. Now, the structure is who reports to whom, who does what. So every company has a culture. Every company has a structure. Does that make sense? I probably have kind of beat that to death, but it is important. All right, and I threw something else over here. It's at the very top of your handout, but it's something really important. Here's a picture of you over here, and I ask you the question: do you fit? When you go out and interview or apply for a job, it's important to that company that you fit into that company. You fit into their educational requirements, you fit into their skills requirements, but you also fit into the culture of that organization. All right. So here's something that's interesting that we need to kind of be familiar with. Does your personality and your values fit the climate and culture of the company? If it doesn't, you may not be making what's the best choice for you. And it may be that you are well qualified, but you don't get the job because of the fact that there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that you're not going to fit into the culture of that organization. It's interesting. I'd be familiar with this idea about do you fit personality and values and climate and culture. Does your personality and values fit the climate and culture of the organization? And if it doesn't, you probably don't want to be there. Our son took a job a few years ago in Shreveport, and it was a good company. It is a good company, but the climate and culture of that company was just different than the personality and values of our son. Now, I'm not saying one was right and one was wrong. It was just different. And he didn't stay with that company very long. He wasn't comfortable in that company. And went on to other things and other fits that are much, much better for him. All right. So organizational culture, the shared assumptions that affect organizational structure, who reports to who does what. How do employees learn culture? It's important that when employees become a part of an organization, that they learn and they understand the culture. And he talks about, and I've got it here on the handout, some of the ways that employees can learn the culture. Sometimes it's the symbols of the organization. The organization has certain symbols, certain things. I almost think when you see that Mercedes symbol, this is not a peace sign. That's the other way. This is a Mercedes symbol. When you see that symbol, it's almost like, hey, that's luxury. You've made it. That's kind of big time. Just that symbol itself. And it doesn't have to be that. It can be other types of symbols, but it's just something that just kind of stands out for you. It just kind of speaks to the culture of that company. Stories. If you're familiar with CenturyLink, since CenturyLink was born right here in this area, Clark Williams Sr. was a person who, he was gifted a little phone company by his parents in Oak Ridge, Louisiana. That was back during the time you had telephone operators and the switchboard. You pushed you punched in to make the calls and that sort of thing. The operator would connect you with whomever you were trying to talk with, and you'd have to go through an operator. And Mr. Williams was a really fine man, actually a man of faith, a very, very family-oriented type person, and that sort of thing. And so for years and years and years, Mr. Williams was in charge of that company, and that company as it grew. But just Mr. Williams and some of the stories about him and some of the things that he overcame and everything to build that company just helped to formulate the culture and for people to learn it. Here's how it happened. Here's how it came about. Heroes. Heroes, I guess I'm going to stretch that a little bit. Michael Jordan. When it comes to footwear, the Michael Jordan, the athletic shoes, other companies, and you may be thinking, I hope you're thinking of examples too of companies that have heroes, people that are very, very important to that company, and so they kind of help with the culture of that company. And then rites and rituals. Mary Kay. Matter of fact, the symbol of Mary Kay is pink. When I think, if you've ever been in front of, unless they've moved, it's been a number of years, but we were in Dallas and went by this building at night, and all the fountains, and I had all these beautiful fountains and everything in front of them, and the lights were pink on the fountain, the water. And I who is it? I said, that's the Mary Kay building. And they have these annual meetings and everything where people are moving up the pyramid and this type of thing. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Dave Ramsey does some things like this. And so what we're talking about here is how do you learn the culture of a company? Well, by the company's symbols, by stories about that company, by the heroes of that company. By rites and rituals that company uses. Okay. There's two statements I put down here for you that I want you to be familiar with. I also want you to be familiar with how employees learn culture. I want you to be familiar with the organizational culture, and I want you to be familiar with what organizational structure is. Two statements. Culture can powerfully shape an organization's long-term success by enhancing its competitive advantage. Culture can powerfully shape an organization's long-term success by enhancing its competitive advantage. We've talked about competitive advantages a bunch of times. And you've got to have a competitive advantage. and sometimes the culture of that company. Maybe a company is known as a work company. I mean, as a company that performs, that works, it does what it's supposed to do. It gets out and it does it well. And that's one of the things that gives that company a competitive advantage. Okay. And the other thing that I want you to be familiar with, I put two sentences down here, that sometimes culture can be strong enough to replace bureaucracy or structure. Sometimes the culture of a company can trump the structure of a company. Its culture becomes even more important than its structure. Its structure may change, but the culture remains stronger. I just want you to be familiar. The reason I want you to be familiar with those two things, those two statements, are it kind of sums up how important the culture is. Every organization has some type of a culture. And sometimes that culture within that organization is very, very strong. And that culture can help determine a company's competitive advantage. And that culture can also sometimes trump or be even more powerful than the structure. Okay, now let's look at organizational structure. An organization is a system of conscientiously coordinated activities or forces of two or more people. That's a little definition of organization. I'd like you to be familiar with that. As I'm doing my thing, it's on the back side of my sheet, depending on how you have put yours together. So I want you to be familiar that an organization is a system of consciously coordinated activities or forces of two or more people. This is a structure. This could be an organizational structure. Here's one person who's the boss and has one employee. That would be an organizational structure as well. That would be kind of, I guess, the smallest organizational structure you could probably have. And he also talks, so I want you to be familiar with does every company have an organizational structure? Yes. Can that organizational structure change from time to time? Yes. Can you change the organizational structure relatively quickly if you wanted to? Not saying it's a good idea, but if you wanted to, and sometimes it may be, yes. Culture, much harder to change the culture because it's those deeply held assumptions. It's hard to change that. It takes more time if you want to, if you want to make that change. So an organizational chart, I want you to be familiar with what that boxes and lines illustrating, showing the formal lines of authority. In this organizational chart right here, you've got a CEO, you've got some senior vice presidents. These may be division managers here. But what this organizational chart does, it shows who answers to whom. I can start down here. This person answers to this person. This person here answers to this one. This one answers to this one, this one, this one. So you have a chain of command from top. This person over here answers to this, So you have a chain of command. It shows you who answers to whom. It shows you who does what. Who is at what level within the organization, who are parallel to each other, and that sort of thing. The vertical is who, I put this here, the vertical is who reports to whom, the horizontal is who specializes in what work. So you can understand a lot by looking at the organizational chart of a company. Okay. Now, what he talks about next is, and I'm gonna leave the camera for just a minute, I'll be back. What he talks about next is the common elements of an organization. And this is, like I say, this is really a pretty fast chapter because what it is, what are some common elements that an organization has? Does an organization normally have a common purpose? Yes. Does it have a coordinated effort or should? Yes. Should there be some type of division of labor? Specialization? Yes. Some type of hierarchy of authority from top to bottom? Yes. Some type of span of control. Span of control is how many people a supervisor can effectively supervise. The CEO supervises 3. This person right here supervises 2, 4, 6, 8. That's the span of control. It has some type of authority and responsibility and delegation type thing. You can see what authority different people have and that type of thing. Everybody that I've drawn here, these are folks that are what are called in the line. Each of one of them are responsible for a particular activity. They are part of the line of the organization. If I put somebody over here and I said this is the legal department and they answer to the CEO. Now the legal department, let's say this was a Mercedes company. Is the legal department, are they involved in building automobiles? The answer is no. What do? They give advice and consent to the CEO. They give legal type advice. And so they're what's called staff. Line people are the ones that are involved in the task of the organization. Legal people advise and assist line. Okay. And in centralization versus decentralized, is your authority mostly located in the top, or do you decentralize your authority throughout the organization? Now, I don't want to get you confused. So you say, what are you talking about? All I'm talking about is every organization, every organizational structure has some common elements to it. Common purpose, coordinated effort, division of labor. I just want you to be familiar with some of these common elements of all organizational structures. Is an organizational structure either going to have centralized or decentralized authority? Yes. Is it going to have line? Yes. Is it going to have some staff? Probably it is. Will there be some type of span of control? How many people a supervisor can effectively supervise? Is there going to be some division of labor? Yes. Should there be coordinated effort? You see what I'm saying? Okay. Now, a couple more things about organizational structure. How can you structure an organization? Any way you want to. And I threw some out here. You can do it by, divisional. Right here, you could do it by organizational structure. This could be vice president of production, vice president of sales, vice president of finance. This would be by function. You might do it by location. You could do it geographically. You could do it by customer. So there's all different ways you can structure your organization. Right? Which one is best? The one that's most effective for you. There's modular structures, there's matrix structures where you take people out of a line and staff and put them into a special project area. That would be a matrix. But here's what I want you to be familiar with. I do want you to be familiar with some of the common elements that you will find in organizations. But the last thing I want you to be familiar with here are mechanistic and organic organizations. Here's the deal. I'm not going to spell it out, but this is a mechanistic organizational structure. This is an organic. These are kind of the two extremes, and organizational structures are going to be somewhere between these two. A mechanistic organizational structure is where, in that organizational structure, authority is centralized, tasks and rules are clearly specified, and employees are closely supervised. Can you say McDonald's? McDonald's would be a pretty mechanistic organizational structure. Is that bad? No. It's the type of organization they are, what they do. They structure it in such a way, and there's a good bit of turnover. They structure it in such a way that it's a highly structured organization. Listen to it again. Authority is centralized. Most authority rests at the top. Tasks and rules are clearly specified for the employees, and employees are closely supervised. That would be a McDonald's. That works. That's the best structure for them. On the other extreme over here is what's called an organic organization. Authority is decentralized. There are fewer rules and procedures, and employees are encouraged to cooperate and respond quickly to unexpected tasks. Employees may be able to take off and take a nap. They may be able to take off and go to the gym and work out. They may have a gym there on the premises of the company. Some of your tech companies, some of your free-thinking technology type companies may be a very organic organizational structure. Like I say, very decentralized, not nearly the structure of rules and more freedom to think and to move, given more to the employees. Well, which is best? It depends on what your organization does, how, and that sort of thing. These are kind of the two extremes that I'd like for you to be familiar with, and organizations are going to be anywhere in between those two. And that is chapter. What I was looking at is you went, wow, where's he go? I was looking at my time because I'm about to run out of film here, and so I didn't want to get cut off right in the middle. But that's the chapter. So is it an important chapter? Yes. Is culture important? Yes. Do I want you to be familiar with what culture is? Yes. Do I want you to be familiar with those couple of statements that we made about culture? Yes. Do I want you to be familiar with how employees can learn culture? Yes. Do I want you to be familiar with what organizational structure is? Yes. What an organization is. What an organizational chart is. And then some of the common elements of an organization, what makes up a line, what makes up staff, and the two extremes, mechanistic and the organic organizational structure. And everything else is somewhere in between those two. And also be familiar with, it's important for you to be the right fit for any company that you decide you want to go to work for. We got one more chapter, human relations, human resource chapter, chapter 9. So I'm going to get my makeup redone with my makeup staff over here, and I'm going to be back in just a few minutes and take care of chapter 9. And to make sure that my executive producer knows that we have finished chapter 8, the loud clap. See you in 9.